All right, this is Tim Cain, Rising Game Budgets. Something I have been lamenting for the longest time is the rise in game budgets because it hurts everybody in the industry. It's not good. Games need to be cheaper to make. Let's see what Tim has to say on it.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Today, I want to talk about
It's been a long time.
rising game
Yeah.
budgets. This was a question from Irvin Chadwick 5046, who asked, would you be able to give a breakdown on why video games are so much more expensive to make now as compared to 10 years ago? First,
Good question. Uh, oh God, it's so multivariate. It's not only is there a rising amount of expectations by players, especially graphically, which increases costs significantly. There's also rising expectation in quality. I hate to say it, but older games were not the most stable things in the world. There's more platforms to deploy to. There is more of a necessity to have accessibility in your game. All these really do add up, and there's also like just bureaucracy in. There's company bureaucracy, right? So there's a lot of like overhead, or having things like HR, and there's less crunch happening than there used to be, if that is crazy to imagine. And it all just adds up and gets bigger. And then there's also inflation, rising wages. There's more competition in the game dev industry, whereas it used to be a not very super well paying, and you had a job and you had to be kind of an entrepreneur in the industry to kind of get in. Now it's very competitive. So because of that, wages do increase, which is good for the developers, but that does also mean that the price of making a game does increase too. So there's a whole bunch of factors that play into this.
off, I can compare it to 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40.
We'll go back to
And I
RS. Don't
will.
worry, Ken.
I'm also going to
Just
assume
waiting.
that this question has nothing to do with sales price. Just to head that off, that's a completely different discussion of why video games cost more now, or even if they do cost more now, adjusted for inflation. But
Sales price though is more of an outcome, right? Of games costing more. Like you need to make the money back, and as we've talked about before, money is returned in two ways: sale number of sales, average price of sale, right? And so you can do both of those. You can make a game that is more widely appealing, which you see a lot with modern AAA games, and or you can increase the price, although that has a diminishing return, right? Because the higher you increase it, the fewer people will want to afford it or will think that it's worth that value. So ideally, you want to find that middle ground where the game is priced for people who for the market that is willing to pay for it, and you've widened the market enough that. And I'm not saying this is the right way to do it, but this is the way that AAA studios are going to look at it and publishers, so that you can get more sales, right? Why make a niche game for a million people, even if it's top tier quality, and sell it for $30 when you can make a $60 game that appeals to 2 million people, and you'll make a fuck ton more money from that.
that's a whole different
But
discussion.
of course, then the budget is usually increased because in order to have that wide appeal, you need to either have stretch those game systems wide or have really high graphical fidelity, have, catchy trailers, really good music, things like that. And honestly, rather than finding talent that is really passionate about making those things, they often just substitute in, okay, we need this thing, let's just pay money, let's just use money. It's kind of weird how all games have the same price point. It's because it's optimal. It is $60 to $70 is optimal for AAA right now.
Not going to talk about sales price here. I'm going to talk about budget.
Yeah,
Also, this is a general discussion.
yeah,
Notice all the caveats because I'm just heading off comments. In general, budgets have gone up. Some games, though, are still done cheap, especially
Yep.
solo games.
Yep.
I can show you a budget of all my games that I used in another video.
Interesting. Yeah, but Outer Worlds graphically is just, making a 3D game like that is already increasing the budget quite significantly. But yeah, this looks about right. Stick of Truth for 10 million, Pillars of Eternity for 4 million is pretty wild. Tyranny was for 3 million. That's even crazier, especially for the quality of writing in Tyranny. I thought was pretty damn decent. I didn't think Tyranny was a bad game, but I don't think it was Obsidian's best game. But I didn't hate it. And for 3 million, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Fallout 2, Arcanum, Temple of Elemental Evil, Bloodlines. Yeah, Outer Worlds for 33 million, it looks like. Sounds about right.
I'll link it below for the
For reference, our game is right on that like $3 to $4 million line. And I think we can do it.
whole video. But this is the budget of all my games since Fallout, because I don't know what the budgets were for Outer Worlds. I'm sorry, I don't know what the budgets were for Grand Slam Bridge or Rags to Riches. I only know what I got paid, which the budget was way higher. But here's all the budgets in millions from Fallout all the way up to Outer Worlds. So this spans
Switch.
20 years. And you can see that even though there are dips, Temple of Elemental Evil costs less to make than Arcanum or Bloodlines, which came before and after it. And Pillars and Tyranny cost less than Stick of Truth or The Outer Worlds. But there are extraneous reasons for this, and you can see the dotted line, the trend line is always up. So
That's true. And you have to keep in mind too that there's different niches that are being targeted here. I think Pillars of Eternity and Tyranny have overlap with the market of Outer Worlds, but it's still a very different niche and subgenre of RPG being made here, CRPGs versus, first person shooter RPGs. So an increase in budget does not necessarily mean that this was inefficient or bad, because this is targeting a very different set of people than these games are. Again, there's overlap, but I would say that Outer Worlds probably has a larger interest than Pillars of Eternity and Tyranny, which are much more niche. But because of that, they can have these more simplistic budgets, and they can still have a good return on investment with it, right? There's no doubt that Pillars of Eternity has, without a doubt, returned the cost to Obsidian, right? 1 to 3.5 million owners at a sales price of average. I need it in US dollars, please. $30, sometimes down to $7.50 for sales. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
So
freedom money.
That's just I put that up there as, in my own case, I see this game budgets are trending upward.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Why are budgets bigger now? There's some real obvious answers to this. The first one would be inflation. Everything costs more now.
Yep.
So of course budgets have gone up because everything that goes into a game costs more. But let's look at those things, because some of them have gone up more than others. Probably the biggest expense, although I'll mention there's one really big expense that I'm not going to include here that sometimes can be bigger than all these other expenses combined. But I'll talk about it at the end, because it's technically not part of the development budget. But the biggest part of the development budget is probably developer
marketing.
salaries.
Yeah,
And
dev
those
salaries
have gone up.
a lot.
They should have gone up. And all of you should be going, yes, Tim, that's a good thing they went up, because don't all of you think developers tend to be underpaid? So you should be very happy that their salaries went up. And therefore, you should be willing to pay more for those games. There are other reasons they've gone up. There have been things, by the way, that have contributed to the prices maybe being able to go down a little bit. Like distribution is easier now. But
yeah, and as things get easier, the budget does go down, right? So like making it so that artists don't have to waste time making LODs with Nanite. That does help to decrease the cost of games, right? Because it decreases the amount of hours spent on a mesh. Oftentimes, it will just mean that they'll put more meshes in the game, right? But theoretically, making games easier to develop and faster, obviously, then decreases the budget. But we also see that that also means that developers tend to increase scope because those things that used to take most of the time now don't take as much time. That is a worrying trend for me a little bit. A little bit.
Combined with all the things I'm telling you about, the prices still should have gone up. Even if the
Yes.
prices stayed the same, adjusted for inflation, all these other things have gotten more expensive. So, in addition to salaries, there's a lot of what I call people expenses that have gone up. That is, for every person you hire, in addition to their salary, a company has to pay a lot of other things. They have to pay insurance for them,
Yep.
they have to pay taxes for them. There are
Bonuses and benefits, training, travel. There's a lot of expenses that go behind employees, and you will still see Coke money. Yeah, you'll still see a lot of most expenses for a budget. It just goes to paying the people, right? And even for Golden Chronicles, when I pitch the budget, it's like, yeah, it's almost entirely for paying salaries because taxes and insurance and all these other expenses. That's where it goes.
taxes that are shared
Mm-hmm.
for employee and employer. I'm talking about the US here. It may be different in other parts of the world. I don't know. So these people expenses have all gone up, which have contributed to game budgets getting higher. I know I had to do that at Troika. I had to look at all those expenses. We completely misjudged for Arcanum some of those expenses, which is why Leonard and Jason and I got half pay for the first year and a half. We literally had no money because we had underestimated how much things were.
It happens often, a
Another
lot.
expense that it's hard to figure out in advance is equipment.
Yep.
Now you think, okay, everyone's got a desk and a chair and a computer, right? There's a ton of other things you end up needing. You
Not
end
even.
up with there are people who need two machines, programmers who need a build machine or
I mean, laptops, multiple monitors. I mean, if you have artists, you're working on a 3D game, they're going to need good rigs. Things can fail. You need to replace those. You need to have replacements. You need to send them often to people, especially nowadays with remote work. You need to build a computer with a 4080 in it, a strong CPU because we're working in Unreal, and three monitors because the artist needs three monitors. It's really heavy. Also the most demanding. Yep. Yep. I mean, you could give a just send a laptop and a vertical monitor to a programmer and they're happy. But yeah, I mean, it's just the hardware is really expensive. It's quite a bit of money, and you have to maintain it. And then you need the software licenses, and you need somebody in charge of maintaining all this. Because if you try to do it yourself, it's going to be way too much wasted time.
a machine that's hooked up to a dev kit if you're doing PC and console
Mm-hmm.
development. There
Dev
are
kits,
artists
yep.
who want a machine to work on and another machine to do their rendering because the rendering often makes their machine
Unusable.
run very sluggishly.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, you sometimes have build machines for a team so that it's periodically just grabbing everything out of source control and making a new build, sometimes multiple times a day.
Yep.
You have render farms where rather than give every artist a second computer, sometimes what we do is we make a render farm where you put your art up there and it handles the rendering for you. What this means though is now you need a whole local network with local servers to handle all this communication in
Or cloud servers, and those are expensive, or local servers with really good internet. And again, that's going to need somebody to maintain it.
your office, and that has to handle emails as well and
Yep.
chats and file storage and online stuff like Confluence and Jira. That's a lot more computers and guess what, software than you may have planned for. You have to buy a lot of this software, compilers, renderers,
Source control.
things like Photoshop, and a lot of art tools, motion capture tools.
And you might think, oh, well, we can get, licenses for some things for cheap, but then you look at something like Perforce. Perforce is considered an industry standard. I don't know why, but it is. And that can cost upwards of over $10,000 for professional licenses. It's crazy. It's absolutely wild.
Tools, sound processing tools,
Mm-hmm.
production tools. A lot of these have moved from you buy them to you pay subscriptions for them. Some of them are both. You have to pay money to get them, and then you have to pay a yearly subscription or a monthly
Yep.
subscription or both to keep them going. And let me tell you, a lot more tools are used now than were used 10, 20, 30 years ago. We used to have to make everything. But now, game engines, renderers, compilers, everything's made. Everything is something you just buy. No one would make those things. Well, very few people would make them. Then there's rent. Now, I could have put this under people costs, but you sometimes have rent just because the company itself has to have
Yep.
a physical location. It has to have some place where publishers can visit. It has to have conference rooms. It has to have some place to put these servers. It has to have some place to put just stuff. With rent comes, even with people working from home, you often paying rent on places, and sometimes you have to sign beyond a year lease, you may have to sign a 2-year or 5-year or 10-year lease, which commits you to a lot of money being spent,
True.
which you're going to have to amortize across all the budgets of all the games you're making. And then that office comes with things like utilities and parking and security and like building infrastructure. Every company I've worked at since starting with Interplay, moving on, has had electronic fob keys to get in to prevent literally people just wandering on off the street and going into people's offices asking questions or taking stuff. Yeah, that's happened. And I know some worse things happened at some local companies too, which is why they now lock all their doors and have almost an airlock to get in, where you can walk in and now you're in a locked glass entryway, and you have to be recognized and have an appointment before they will let you in. Some fans out there get scary. All of this is expense, costs money. All of this has to be put into the budget for the game. So with all that,
Yeah, because it's your burn costs, right? And you know, a publisher is going to ask you that, like, what are your monthly costs right now? And that's just to keep the lights on, just to keep food on the table. You know, that's not even to develop the game. You know, and that has to be factored in, and that has to be factored in too when you finished a game and you're starting pre-production of another one. You know, you have that downtime, and that's where you're relying on sales of your previous game to help keep you going forward until you can pitch like a vertical slice of your next game to receive funding to then keep the lights going forward. It's very stressful, and it's a lot of money.
There's more. There's other reasons the budget has gone up. Games need more people and take longer to make. Both of those things increase the budget significantly. Now you may go, why does it take more people? You have better tools and more tools. Why does it take longer? Your tools should be
Rising
better.
scope and standards.
I will give you two different reasons. The first one is, I think, purely art.
Yep.
And possibly related to increasing resolutions.
Yep.
There's an expectation among gamers that games will keep looking better and better and better.
And it's dangerous. It's a fucking dangerous, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I mean, I see people looking at Stalker 2 and saying the game looks really bad. Are you playing the same game that I am? Holy shit, does the game look good? It's these expectations that are pushing people to spending so much more money on art. Stop it. Like, just Jesus Christ. I get that you want a game to look good, but can we not blow sand up everybody's asses thinking that a new release like Stalker 2 looks bad just because of a little bit of lumen flickering or some issues with textures? Like, those are just bugs. They can be fixed, or it's the technology that's limiting, not the fidelity of the art. Like, stop.
And I don't just mean along one axis. Gamers expect higher polygon models. That takes longer to make.
Higher resolution textures, better technology for lighting like ray tracing, even though it's extremely demanding, and baked lighting is still way, 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 way better for performance in pretty much every scenario and doesn't look that much worse.
Which means you have to hire more artists if you want to make as many creatures and people with as many animations as previous games. Those higher polygon models need higher resolution textures. Not always. Sometimes you can stretch a lower resolution one, but usually you have higher resolution textures. Those take longer to make. People expect better animation, sometimes mocap animation. They expect facial animation, something we never used to do.
Facial animation and mocap is expensive as hell. It's so expensive. And voice acting too, then on top of that, because if you have Facial animation, you probably have voice acting. Super expensive.
And now it's expected. You can't get away without it. Lighting. We didn't used to do lighting. Now, if you didn't do lighting, people would call you out. All of this adds up. All of these are needed and expected and add up. They require additional personnel. Sometimes you may have someone on your team. All they do is lighting.
Yep.
They don't make a single level. They don't make a single piece of art, but they light every level. And you need these people.
In fact, if we looked at a game, I don't know if like Stalker 2 has credits. Stalker 2 credits. If we took a look, they probably have multiple lighting artists. God. Oh my god. It's gonna be so hard to find these are really bad credits. Look at these English cast members. These are all for voice acting. You know how much this costs? It's crazy. Absolutely wild. Crazy.
So that's what I call the art bucket. Then there's another bucket I would call the feature bucket.
Scope creep.
And the feature bucket can just be said this way. Players now expect more features and better features.
Yep.
Now, I talked about this in the fast travel video, which I'll link below, that people just expect more things. There's features we didn't used to have that now are expected. One of them I mentioned was voiceover. Games didn't used to have it or had it in a very limited way. Then more games added it, and more games added it. And now there are people who literally will not play a game that doesn't have voiceover. And if you don't believe me, go look at my video
He's right.
on why I don't like voiceover and see all the people on there who commented they won't even play a game without voiceover. And there were some people who said they won't play games with voiceover. So there are two camps, like everything in design.
Damned if you do, damned if you
But
don't.
there are enough people out there that will think if your game is old-fashioned or just won't play it if it doesn't have VO. Now, there are ways of designing your game, so you may not need VO, but you can't do that on every game. Gamers expect more and better UI. They expect it to be smoother. They expect to be able to customize it. They expect tons of options.
Yep.
And tons of options on everything, not just like UI size and location and text resizing, but they may want volume control on multiple axes. I just don't want a master volume control. I want voiceover volume and music volume and sound effects volume. They want input rebinding, not just for accessibility reasons, but they just may want to be able to do it because they feel like it. I don't like the bindings you provided on this controller. I want to be able to rebind everything.
And to be fair with something like Unreal, key rebindings and different sound sliders are really easy to do. It's not terribly difficult work, but other engines might struggle with this more. I mean, and I can respect Unreal. Unreal is trying to integrate all of these things in really easy to use ways to help developers not have to spend the time that they used to on the old input action system, or before with different sounds. It's getting better, but I think that it is just this constant upward battle of trying to match ease of use and stability of technologies with the rising expectations. And I don't think that players should lower their expectations, but there needs to be an understanding that as expectations increase, if technology and stability cannot match that, you will get safer, less risky, more expensive games. Simple as that. And it will not get better until something fails.
And there are players who expect that. Guess what? Some of these features aren't hard to do. They're pretty easy to do. But some of them are hard to do. And I've said UI is just painstakingly time-consuming to do. But there's lots of these features now that everybody expects, and they need to be done. And once they're done, they then have to be tested and maintained. And that's just time. And time is money. That's basically what it boils down to. If you don't believe me, go back and look at games from 10, 20, 30 years ago. You're going to see games with smaller teams and faster development times because they have simpler art and far less features. Now, one last thing. I said there was something that's usually not included in the dev budget, but
marketing
has been contributing to the overall rise in game costs, and that is marketing. Marketing is more important now than ever to have a discoverability video that I'll link below, but you pretty much have to have marketing now. Well, marketing
Keep in mind the Cyberpunk 2077 marketing budget was over $200 million.
is now more expensive than ever. It's hard to do marketing because ad prices have gone up, especially because people want to do targeted ads. And
Competition is more fierce too.
Pay for that data, and then you have to make the ad. Then you
competing
have to
for
make the
Steam
ad
algorithm.
inserted into streams where people will see it.
Expensive.
And so many people out there are good at blocking stuff or paying for premium, so they don't see ads, and it's just causing this disconnect between people who want to tell you about something that's coming out, and you're going, nope, I don't want to hear about anything. So it's becoming more and more expensive to reach you. There are games out there, and I won't name them, you may know them, whose marketing budgets have exceeded their development budgets. In some cases, far exceeded. Like
True.
Double or triple the development budget. Let that sink in. They spent more on advertising the game than they did on making it. And this is becoming more and more true. So marketing budgets have gone up. It's contributing to the game budgets go up because the more you promise, then the more you have to do.
Well,
and that's a problem.
It's development plus marketing equals game budget, right? And yeah, it absolutely contributes to it. You need to make that money back. You spent the money on marketing. That money needs to come back. And how does it come back? Sales and PPU, price per unit. And it all boils down to the same thing. You either need to increase the number of people that are going to buy your game and or increase the cost of the game. And what do we see in many cases? Both increase.
Marketing often setting expectations too high, and then people don't like the game because it didn't match the marketing. And so the next time you go to make a game, you're like, well, let's try to include those features. Made the budget go up. Anyway, that's all the reasons I could think of why game budgets have been rising steadily over the past several decades. So I hope Irvin Chadwick 5046 that answered your question.
Great video. And yeah, it's a slippery slope. I think it's starting to break at the ceiling is starting to shatter here for a lot of the AAA companies. Can't ask you think the feature includes AAA studios going back to lower fidelity? No. No, because the amount of backlash that they would receive would be too high. And I think that it's just going to lead to either some AAA, studio owner is going to have to just say the tough part out loud. Stop expecting so much from our games. The problem is, imagine how that sounds to a gamer, right? But it's really just, you need to just let us make a game that we want and see if you like it. And we need to, I think that AAA studios do need to rely on their name a bit more and stop wasting so much money on marketing and just try to go back to making a good game and, take away some of the features that cost so much, like those crazy, giant, perfectly feeling and sounding moments, and just go back to, try to look at like what old action games did, and just let the enemies clip a little bit, let there be some jank, because it's too much time and waste of time to fix. Like something similar happened with Pokemon Scarlet Violet. Games released with a lot of glitches, bugs. The fandom was split between how dare you release such a buggy game versus maybe if y'all stopped expecting so much. It's also the fucking Nintendo Switch. Okay, we're gonna see if the league's open, but that was a great video. Another fantastic one from Tim Cain. If you guys want to support him, definitely go give him a like and subscribe. And that is it. So thank you. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching that. I will catch you on the next one. Bye-bye, guys.